Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai. We're up to Perek Shvi, Halacha Gimel, and Halacha Dalet. We're going to be learning today Daf Samach Ches. We left off on Daf Samach Ches Amud Aleph at the end, mamish at the end of the third line, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. We are going to be concluding in Kamus, the little sugya of Oisek the Malachtoi Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, as we just came off learning that when a person is a poyel, in other words, they are a hired hand, their obligation of being faithful to their employer, which also would include for them eating properly, for them sleeping the night prior properly. If not, they're not going to have the ability of being fully there. How much more so when a person is oisik b'malachta shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if a person is a teacher, if a person is any type of klei kodesh, this type of level of obligation. And as we mentioned yesterday, just to know that in the Torah explicitly, you have all these psukim of lo yalin schar sachir, the ardinim on the employer, how he's not allowed to delay payment, and God forbid lo yisashrik, to withhold the payment. Notice it's a two-way obligation. We're going to be focusing now on the obligation from the poyel to the employer. That will close the sugya of Halacha Gimel, the Mishnah of Halacha Dalet, which we already quoted, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago. Halakeach Yain min Hakutim is a Mishnah that's brought down in many places in Shas Bavli, many places. And that will be, it's a Mishnah, as we will see, that follows the Shita of Rabbi Meir, that even by Dinei Doyer, we apply the principle of Bereira. We're going to learn also in this Mishnah of the unique time of Ben Shmoshes, because when we began this Perek, we gave the general rule, right, that we already learned also previously in the Masechta, that a person is not allowed to separate Trumas or Maislis on Shabbos because you're doing a Sakin Keli, right, Makeh B'Patish, even though it's a Tikkun that's not discernible to the eye, nevertheless it's also Midrabana. How does that apply in Ben Hashmoshes? And as we will see, there was at least something unique about Ben Hashmoshes. We already learned this before, that the Mai is allowed to be tithed during the Ben Hashmoshes going into Shabbos. The case that the Mishnah will be given of Halikeach Yain Min Hakutim is dafka not about the Mai, but as we're going to chazer quickly, the unique status of the Kutim and how it really changed throughout the times of Chazal. But Bisman that this Mishnah was compiled, the Kutim were still considered Yidden, obviously, because if the Kutim would have the din of what they have right now, which they are Goyim, you're not allowed to buy wine from Goyim. Yayin Nesach, Yayin Stam. And by them it was Yayin Nesach, because actually one of the worst things that happened to the Kutim that downgraded their status is when we discovered that in a hidden way they were constantly serving Avodah Zarah. So our Mishnah obviously held that they had a din of a Yid. On the other hand, like we keep on learning that since they misinterpreted, because they did not accept the Torah Shebal Peh, so they applied Lifnei Iver Loisit and Michshel only Kipshutai. They, even when they were careful for themselves to fully tithe, like we have in the beginning of Masechta Schulin in the Babli, right, that they would check for themselves, but anything that they would sell would have a chazak of bona fide, not kosher meat. So anything you buy from them has to be tithed. Again, we're going to go into the details when we learn the sugya about the unique time of Ben Hashmoshes, the solution the Mishnah gives of how to resolve the wine based on Bereira. The Gemara is going to quote, as we already had before, a Baraisa in which we have Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon that disagree with the Mishnah. Shema Tibaka Hanoid. And what's mamish amazing is that even though the Baraisa writes that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon argue with the Tan of our Mishnah, which we know is Rabbi Meir, Shema Tibaka Hanoid, really the main reason why Rabbi Yossi argues with Rabbi Meir is something else. The main reason why Rabbi Shimon argues with Rabbi Meir is a third reason. Elamar, in those two reasons, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon are not on the same page. Where do they have a secondary reason in which both of them agree to argue with our Mishnah? Shema Tibaka Hanoid. Now, I don't know how much time we're going to have. I was thinking of maybe pulling out an Eiduvin, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis in the Babli, Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, but it's mamish amazing. This is not so uncommon, but we're going to have a machlokes between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi as to whether Rabbi Yossi subscribes to Breda, whether he does not subscribe to Breda. When these topics, when this Mishnah and the Braisa are brought up throughout Shas Bavli, many places there are different statements or different opinions being linked to different Tanoim. And we're learning Yerushalmi, so we're going to learn the unique approach of the Yerushalmi, compounded with the difficulty that there are so many different Gersois in the Gemara Yerushalmi, that everything we'll be learning, obviously, will only be following one approach. There's going to be other approaches that will change everything, mamash 180 degrees. And let's see how far we can get into this topic. So, Daf Samaches Amud Aleph, again, we're all the way, we're by the dot, by end of the third line. So we began with, the whole topic is that you have this person, he's a poil. This is not related to Shabbos. A poil was invited to eat of his employer. He was given, that was the go try that, maybe not, maybe it's not that healthy, maybe that would be the new fad, the new diet. Okay, guys. And here, because of the obligation, or because of the standard of the poil that wants to go lefnim shurasadim, and he wants to nevertheless take off the mice separations, beginning with trumas meiser, which will mean from the 100 figs, 1 fig, which he may not eat because that's going to be gifted to a kohen. What do? You only have 99 figs. That's the question we had in the Mishnah. We had a three-way machlokes tanoim, and the reason why Said Ashbag and Said Rabbi Yossi argue with the Tanakama, and they hold that he actually must eat the 100 figs. The only question is it out of his pocket, or is it Tanai based in out of the pocket of the employer? Because if he's going to eat 1 fig less, he's going to have a little bit of less energy. So let's go weiter. Says the Gemara story. Rabbi Yechanan, he went on a trip. Ashkach Safra Inayas, the word Inayas, or as the Marafulda is goyres, it's Aleph Yud Yud Nun Yud Saf Shamach, excuse me. So it's going to be Eines teaches the Marafulda Nischalesh. He saw that you have a school teacher that was very weak. Amalahu, and he asked the Lohu, not Loi. So he asked the Chevre Mauchein, why is this teacher such a weakling? So Amrullah, they told him, a Chassidish person, Soyim, how to name fasting. Fast every Monday and Thursday. Amalei, so Rabbi Yechanan said, now lay, not Louis, he told the teacher, not allowed to do that. Because as we just had above, right, the Braisa we quoted, noch on top of the psalm, right? A person cannot afflict themselves. How are they going to be fully on? And if that is when it comes to doing a human work, choil work, which includes a teacher, which includes any kli kodesh, but you can argue on top of the list are teachers, is like kolchchein, that one is not allowed to be yoshev va'osik b'tainis. Look inside the top Pnei Moshe, second top Pnei Moshe. He also is goydis like the Marafulda, ainis humauna umesuga b'yoser. In other words, the Pnei Moshe is saying maybe b'zmanoi every now and then to give a little fast, mela, but whatever he was doing beyond what he was able to handle. The Shal al Zev Amrullah mipnei shutzoyim. So Amarloi the Pnei Moshe lois hamalamed. So he told directly to the malamed. He didn't inquire from the malamed. Interesting. But once he found out, he told the malamed. Also lachli as yeshavatainis. Okay, like we mentioned, that's really the sheet of the Baal Shem Tov. I think the Harav Amagid Dr. Zajac, I think from him there's an expression as a kleina lechele in Guv is a groisa lach in the neshama. Yeah, in other words, because because we're smaller people, we're not talking about the great tzaddikim that we're a whole different. But most of us, if we're not feeling well, how can we do what we're supposed to do? And the same thing goes with parnasa and with our needs. If we don't have our needs met, we won't be functioning on the level that we could be functioning. So we have to do our part. Parnasa comes from the Oivish. We need what we need, and Hashem should give it to us. Amen. And then that will give us the koyach and the yechaylos to do our job. Okay.
Das was once asked by Rabbi Marash from Chassidim lead.
Because
so we understood that the basis.
Okay, let's leave it later because it's not going to. In the Mishnah again, this is the final shita of Rabbi Yossi. As was lo yachzoich. Lo yachzoich means he agrees with the Rashbag that you cannot eat 99 figs. You cannot be choisech a fig. Eloma, he says that the employer has to pay for it. Why? Mipnei shehu tanai bezdin. Says the Gemara, Rabbi bar Ashi b'shem Rav, that what is the tanai bezdin? Shetei trumas meiser Michel. Again, you see the Gershon is Michel Balabayis. But here, see one thing the Mishnah did not speak about that the Gemara is going to address. The Mai demands at the end of the day really two separations. Trumas meiser. Of course, to do Trumas Meiser, you have to first separate Meiser Rishon. But Meiser Rishon, to begin with, does not have a status of Kedusha. It's only a financial obligation to give to people that come from the Bnei Levi, which includes Kohanim, also Bnei Levi. And because of Hamotzim Mechaveri, you get to keep it. So you separate Meiser Rishon only in order to separate Trumas Meiser, and the Trumas Meiser you give to the Kohen, and you keep the Meiser Rishon. But there's also Meiser Sheni. So our Mishnah never spoke about Meiser Sheni. So the Gemara needs to clarify that even in this case, where the payil is going lifnei mishuras hadin, and yet there is a Tanai Bezdin that the employer has to go out of pocket, has to pay for the chumrah of the worker, but that only goes on Trumas Meiser. That is Mishal Balabayis. However, when it comes to the Meiser Sheni, and by the Meiser Sheni won't be physically removed from the figs, if not the Mishnah would have spoken about it, but as we see continuously throughout, that Meiser Sheni was deconsecrated on money. Whose money? The money that's being used to be machalal, the Meiser Sheni, says Rabbi bar Ashi, b'shem Rav, that's Mishal Poyol. In other words, the coins that are being used has to belong to the worker. Number one, he doesn't suffer a monetary loss. Verstehst, won't make a difference to him. So it would be completely beyond to put that on the Balabayas, and he gets to eat it. He goes to Yerushalmi, and every Yid went to Yerushalmi regardless. Everyone had these coins of Meiser Sheni. So you accumulate more coins. Elamai, you have to go out of pocket, but you're eating the figs. He's eating the whole 100 figs, so he's not losing any money. Okay. So here we begin. So this is a huge Mishnah. We mentioned, just to know, this Mishnah is in Eruvin Lamed Vav Amud Beis. I wrote this down because I looked at the Maseidah Sashas in Eruvin. You have this Mishnah brought down in Bavla Yuman Nunhei, Baba Kamas Amachtes, Me'ila Chav Beis, Chulun Yudalet, Gittin Chav Ches. In other words, these are one of these Mishnayisin that are really discussed a lot. There are so many different Gersois that we'll have here on today's little Daf Samachas Amud Beis that go minakotza lakotza, that it's awesome, and it's a bit intimidating to learn the Yerushalmi simply because we don't know for sure what text is the authentic text. But we're going to learn today. We're going to follow one approach. Let's go. Says the Mishnah, Halikeach yayin mi bein hakutim. A person bought wine from the kutim. Number one, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir that has two different opinions. Both are needed to get the right premise for this Mishnah. Premise number one, that kutim, there was one period of time that they were given, according to Rav Meir and others, the status of a Yid. So therefore, there's no issue buying wine from them. Number two, Rabbi Meir paskins, we don't paskin like Rav Meir. Rav Meir holds that we apply the principle of Bereira even by Dinei Torah. And here we're speaking about Dinei Torah because kutim, even the ones that were observant for themselves, would not make the effort of selling a product that's kosher. So when it comes to produce that has to be tithed, what they sell is tevel vadai. And yet, Rav Meir subscribes to the principle of Bereira. That's how we know throughout that this Tana is Rav Meir, even though Rabbeinu HaKadosh is some stam. Which would mean that the buyer, the Jew, has to separate everything. And what happened over here And here we have to go into the let's go into the Rashirilio. Everything here is Bekitzer Nimrats. The Rashirilio, which will be very important, will be on the right column. You see the Mishnah. Let's go a few lines after the Mishnah. When he begins to say that Oimer Shnei Lugim, he has to add something very important. That our Mishnah is speaking about a person realizing that Oy Gewalt, it's not tithe. If you would realize that Erev Shabbos, there would be no problem. Gesundheit tithe it. The Mishnah cannot be referring to Shabbos either. On Shabbos, even if you don't make the identification on Shabbos, you cannot begin the process on Shabbos, and that is indeed the bigger message from Perek Shvi, that all of the Tanoim that we base, solids and liquids is Erev Shabbos. But there is a certain nuance that we see in our Mishnah that leads us to understand that our Mishnah must be speaking about Bein Hashmashos, because if not, there would have been a more specific type of Tanai which would have aligned with what we began the Perek with, as we'll see in the Rashirilio. So he right away tells you that, you know what our Mishnah is talking about, the Erev Shabbos, Bein Hashmashos Eidei. Kidiktani b'toyseftem, lekeyach yaim b'erev Shabbos, v'shachach melahaflish oimer, u'perishu ha'toysves, b'perek hayoshon. This is in Bavli Sukkah Daf Chav Gimel. That v'loy sheshachach atche kiddush hayoim. The case of our Mishnah is not that he forgot until it was what we call tzei sakri chavim, laila vadai, because the im kein afilu likroi shem asu. Kedemuchach bekama duchte. She'ein takana l'tevel b'Shabbos, period. Ela be'iser, even though there's no takana, the Rashirilya wants to tell you like this, Simcha, that if a person wrongfully was misaken tevel on Shabbos, we don't say what you did is to be undone. That we don't do. Ela be'iser, that what? That she'im shachach v'aver v'tiknai misukan. We're learning big klal. But that's not the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is not telling you a b'di'evet. The Mishnah is telling you a lechatchila. Okay, and he goes further. All these details. We're speaking about tevel is muktzah because since lechatchila there's nothing you can do, so there's nothing you're going to do with the food, so it becomes a muktzah. Okay, it was not separated to be used for anything. It's not mucham. So that's number one. So for our Mishnah, that doesn't say exactly when. Our Mishnah doesn't even say the words out of Shabbos. So he quotes we have the words he brought it be'erev Shabbos. Shabbos, no. If you reminded on Shabbos, there's nothing you can do. On the other hand, it can't be that he reminded himself. He realized that he has to be masakin it before Shkia, right? Before Bein Hashmashos. Because then there's no issue. Be masakin it. Who's stopping you? Must be she'ein shehuz b'yom kedei lahafresh. Oh, and he's adding another din. You know, we learned in what would be Simcha if I realized before Shkia. The only reason why I'm not separating it is because, let's say I realized it 5 seconds before Shkia. And it's going to take me 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I don't have enough time. If that would be the case, what would we do? We would do what we began this Perek with. We began Perek Shvi by saying, and we pointed out in the Gemara in the beginning, that if the produce is in your reshus, the solution of making a Tanai, even though you will only identify it on Shabbos Kodesh, is a good solution, for which you don't even need to have Breda. But in such a scenario, when you make the designation, you specify, remember that the Meiser Sheni is in the north or in the south, in the top or in the bottom. And the Mishnah doesn't say that you specify where the Meiser Sheni is allocated, even though the truth is you're never going to be removing it anyway because you're going to be mechalel it on mois. Doesn't matter. But when it comes to Tumas or Meisers, you always find that when a person is making a verbal separation prior to the physical identification, in the verbal separation itself, you have to be quite a shame makoim. And this Mishnah doesn't do it. That is where the Rashi says, ooh, so what's the case of the Mishnah? In Cain, the Mishnah should have said, here in the Yerushalmi. right? The whole formulation of what you say normally is in the 5th chapter here of the Mai. Ella vadai, it's gavaldik how he deduces. Ella vadai aida kegoin sheshachach ad ben hashmoshes. For us, on mitzad echad, guys, remember, if the Mai, we learned it before in the Masechta, the Mai is allowed to be separated ad ben hashmoshes. Now you understand why the Mishnah gave a mashal of alekech yaim ben akut. Beautiful. You're not going to say alekech tevel from a yid, a proper yid, because there's a din. A Jew is not allowed to sell tevel. I know there is a psoirach, but why would the Rabbeinu HaKadosh give an example of someone who either a big exception or is violating? We can't speak about the Mai, because then even Ben Hashmoshes, you can be mafresh Ben Hashmoshes. So to give a mashal that a person bought tevel and they're not being kodesh makoim, must be tevel gamur, Ben Hashmoshes. Even on Ben Hashmoshes, you can't do it on Ben Hashmoshes. Also lahafresh k'tam perek v'mem adlikin. Sofek hashecha, sofek enech hashecha. Ein maasden esad vadai. The Mai, yeah, vadai no. Upeidish al kutim, vadai nino. Kidetran. As we learned in our Mishnah, the fact that you are beginning with shnei lugim, sha'ani asid lahafresh. Whenever we speak about shnei lugim, even though the Mishnah never said you have 100 lugim, but that's self-understood. Just like we had on the previous Mishnah by the figs, that when a guy is chopping one fig, and it's neighboring 9 figs, it's from 100 figs. Shnei lugim. Now what's 2? My trumas meiser is 1. Shnei 2% is truma gedoyla. Harei hein truma the kuti afilo truma gedoyla ein a mafresh for other people. Afagav, second to last line in the Rashi. Yes, asrei ma'asrei, right? Because the b'mai, the chsiv, be'oiraisa, the kutim were misar zehiri. So what's the issue? Says the Rashi. We learned all this already. Hanamili mashehein ba'atzman oichlem, top of the left column. Avol kishemoichem lachedem v'lo yichayshi. They're not. They don't care because the kutim are chashidi. We suspect that they violate alifnei iver leisitim michshol kedeisim b'berekam the chulin. Okay, we can stop over here. I just want to point it out over here. And therefore, in other words, kvias makoim, that's the unique din. Ben hashmoshes is unique. To actually make the separation, can't do. What could you do? That's beautiful. You can make the Tanai, and you're making a Tanai not like we had in Halacha Aleph, not like we had in Halacha Beis, we needed Breda anyways because of the liquidy part of it. But in Halacha Aleph, in this Perek, you make a pre-Shabbos Tanai and you separate it, you identify it on Shabbos. The first Halacha of this Perek does not need Breda. Since it's Bein Hashmoshes, you can't do that. That's the unique din. So you can make a Tanai, but you can only identify it after Shabbos, which will be the case of the Mishnah. You will need to rely on the principle of Breda. And not only that, you can't be Koivei Amokoim, because it's already Ben Hashmoshes, and it might be Shabbos Kodesh. That's the unique case of the Mishnah. Okay, now let's read it inside. So, Omer, but since it's only Ben Hashmoshes and not Shabbos Vadai, at least you can make now the verbal designation, but it's a futuristic designation because you're saying that Omer, you say Shnei Lug Shani Asid LaHafresh, which will be after Shabbos. They are truma, and that actually means that currently it's no longer tevel. It's not tevel. You only will identify it Matzah Shabbos, since you're going to leave over the amounts needed, and when you will actually identify it, it's going to go retroactive. That's the whole word. So it works. And then ba'asara ma'isa. Ma'isa means ma'isa rishon. And the truth is, Chavre, just to know, the Mishnah Rabbeinu HaKadosh is rounding up the numbers. We already learned how important it is. Al tarbela aser umadois. We already learned that. So really, what you're doing is it's 9.8, just for the record. If you have 100 lugin, right, and 2 is Truma Gedoyla, so you have 98 lugin left. How much is 10% from 98? 9.8. Now, what happens when you take off 9.8? How much do you have left? You have 88.2. Just to make that clear. So how much is the Meiser Ani or the Meiser Sheni, which is 10% from the 88.2? Let's say 8.82. So when the Mishnah says that you're saying Va'asara Meiser, the Mishnah is rounding up the number. V'tisha Maisa Sheni, again, it's 8.82. 8.82 is a little bit less, but he's rounding up the numbers, and that's something common in the Mishnah. V'tisha Maisa Sheni, and so the same word, guys. You have the words. The words in English is the designation is happening now. Because if the designation would not happen now, you have tevel. You will only identify it after Shabbos. Prior to its identification, even if it would be liquid, there's no issue of mixture. That was the chap of halacha beis. It's gavaldik. You're gonna eat it before you identify it. Yeah, no problem. No problem, because Bereda and Tav Samach days. Now, again, whether it's Umei Chel or Umei Chal, so what's the types of Mechal? So either the says the word Mechal means you're moist. In other words, the Mishnah the word Umechal can mean, according to the Pnei Moshe, you're maschel. You begin umaschel v'shoisa. Look inside the top of Pnei Moshe. V'hai taner av meirhu the sfiralei af b'do'iraisa yesh b'reida. And therefore we say umasha nishar have a ki'ilu hofresh mitchila. And we quoted this a few daf ago, and this is something that we spoke a lot more in the Bavli. And this is halacha l'maisa. Like which tanoim do we follow? We actually paskin that we only applied the principle of Breda by Dina de Rabbanan, like in the rabbinic Eid of Tchumen. Even if you're going to say that the 13 meal is Doiraisa, even if, right, I think it's Rabbi Akiva, but the 2 meal is Vadei Mid Rabbanan, and if you have, a Chacham coming to the city on your right and another Chacham to the city on your left, and you put 2 Eruvim before Shabbos, and you want to decide on Shabbos which one you're going to go to, that will be an example where we do rely on Breda, because it's only an Isur D'Rabbanan. But the Ein Halacha came. Elo, the Kaimelon says the Pnei Moshe, third line from the top, that only B'D'Rabbanan yesh Breda. Avalkan, Kiv, and the Vadei Tevelu, as we spoke out, that's the whole Kutim, B'Do'iraisa, be Paskin Ein Breda. And therefore, the Ein Oichel V'Shoyisa al Smach Sheyafrish, Acharka. Elo Tzorech Lahafrish, Acharka Choichel V'Yishte. And Lahafrish is Asid. In other words, he wants to point out that we don't paskin like our Mishnah. Why? Because of Ein Bereda. And this is important, just as a few words of introduction to the little Gemara, which is not little at all. Now, says the Gemara that we learned in a Braisa, Tane, and again, I'm adding the words Zu Divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay? I'm looking in the Shinun Neschois. Zu Divrei Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir, and with the emphasis, by the way, it's not only about Bereda. However, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon will answer. Why will they answer? Shema Tibaka Hanoid. Why does Rabbi Meir respond? So we have in the Bavli many of the times that we mentioned before. Lechesh Tibaka. What do you mean? Maybe it's gonna Tibaka Hanoid means that we're speaking about wine. The wine is in a big skin, wine skin. And that's something that it's a lot of wine. So using it, not like we learned about drinking out of the cup, where we said that since you're doing it la'alted, even Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon are not going to suspect that something will happen to the cup. But when you have something that's large and you're coming and you're going and you're pouring and you're repouring, there is a chance of Shemati Baka Hanoid. I want you to know that this is something loy shchiach. I'm just giving you the words that the Noisei Kalim say over here, that Rashi says that. And therefore, since it's loy shchiach, it's already self-understood that this is not the main reason why Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon challenged Rabbi Meir. So the question is, why didn't they mention the main reason? And hold that thought. So it says, let's read it. If it happens, then it's going to chap that you will, God forbid, tevel, right? Okay. Like look inside the Rashi really on the left column, 1, 2, 4, in the beginning of the fourth line from the top, he writes befedish, the Tama the Bikias Hanoid ein nira shei ikeratam the Holoshchiach. So it's very simple. If you have a Tana Simcha and people say what they say, the bottom line is that they argue with Rav Meir, but they give a reason. And you know that their reason is a shvacha reason. Because for a wine skin, wine is expensive. People don't store wine if there's a big chance that their wine will get lost. Might happen. Anything might happen. I mean, so there must be other reasons. I'm following one way of learning the Gemara. The reason why the Baraisa quoted a Tam that he calls the Loi Shchiach is because Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, who both argue with Rav Meir, each one has their own personal opinion, Ikar opinion, why they argue with Rav Meir, but Rabbi Yossi's opinion and Rabbi Shimon's opinion are different. As we'll see, each one, according to one of the Gersois, different. In other words, Rabbi Yossi argues with Rabbi Shimon's rationale why he argues. Rabbi Shimon argues with Rabbi Yossi, and yet they both agree that the secondary reason they're together. So it's interesting. So that would make more sense that the Baraisa, which relative to the Mishnah, it's being Marich, it's quoting two Tanoim that we don't even have in the Mishnah, but it's also being Mekatzer. It's quoting a reason why they both are on the same page that we argue Shamatibak Hanoit. Be'emes, even beyond that, and more importantly, because of a primary reason, each one argues with Rabbeinu, and that's what the Gemara wants to discover over here. That loy ketamadohadein tamadodein. Rabbi Yossi's primary reason won't be like Rabbi Shimon's. Rabbi Shimon's won't be like Rabbi Yossi's. And let's go, what are they? So Talmud the Rabbi Yossi. Now, Mamash, the Gersois are so important. Let's at least try. I don't know how much time we're going to have. It gets a little bit complicated because however you're going to read it now, it's going to affect how you read the Gemara tomorrow. Let's go with the Marafulda. I think that will be, we for sure have enough time for that. Let's at least begin with that. So the Marafulda is like 7 lines from the top of the Amid, and he's good is not Shema Yisayeya. No. He's good is the word Shema Misuyam. Okay? Now, let me explain to you like this. What I'm saying now, I know Befedish and the Babli, we don't hold like this. The Gemara and Babli in Eruvin and in other places say that Rabbi Yossi does not subscribe to Bereda. Guys, if you don't subscribe to Bereda, like we learned at the Pnei Moshe, that's the main reason why you would argue with Rav Meir. It doesn't work. That means Rabbi Yossi would agree with what with the Mishnah Halacha Aleph, because then you're separating it. You are identifying it on Shabbos. You don't need Bereda. But already in Halacha Beis, Rabbi Yossi also would argue, once you're leaving the cup, at the end of the cup, or after you poured it out of the cup because of muktzah and a chanami. But the Yerushalmi doesn't hold that Rabbi Yossi holds ein bereda. The Yerushalmi holds, according to the Marafulda, that Rabbi Yossi holds like Rav Meir, that even by dinei doiraisa, yes bereda, but one exception from the ganze Torah. What Trumas U'Maasros? By Trumas U'Maasros, the Torah says, Harimoisem, the nechshav lochem trumaschem, and there's a hekesh. None of this is written here. This we have all on the Bible. So since there's a pasuk that speaks about the act of doing truma, the harimoisem, etc., the nechshav lochem trumaschem, from the words the nechshav lochem trumaschem, Chazal learn that you don't have to physically separate Trumas U'Maasros for you to have done your duty. That even only the intent, even only, let's say, a mental designation, by us a mental means always verbal. A verbal designation is enough. We've already learned this a lot. You're being quite ashamed. Where does that get from? It comes from the nechshav. Machshav is enough. But since you have in the same pasuk, Bahari Moisem, which is physically separating, that we are calling identifying, and the nechshav, which is the verbal designation, the machshava, they're juxtaposed. So we compare one to the other, just like the physical separation happens. There's no bereda. You did it. So the nechshav lachem, when is it enough for you to make a verbal, mental designation? Only if you're doing it immediately. In other words, Rabbi Yossi, who generally, according to the Marafulda, who subscribes to the din of bereda, even by doiraisa, does not allow us to use the principle of bereda uniquely by Trumas U'Maasros. By Trumas U'Maasros, that's the way the Marafulda understands the words misuyam, which means clear. The way he teaches means that by maasros, you want to make a verbal declaration, it has to go into effect right away. I want to say, according to this, l'chu'ura, Rabbi Yossi would even argue with the first mission, that you're making a pre-tanai, and then you separate, you're identifying it later. That the way the Mara Fulda understands, if these are the words of Rabbi Yossi, it has to be Mesuya. Means there's no such a thing of you making a separation. Now, when you identify later, there's no such a thing. We'll read it inside. The Ba'inon Shetehei Hatrumas V'Maisres Misuyamim. Misuyamim means they have to be identified clearly right away. And V'Hache Le'Kavalahem Makoim Eina Mesuyam. It means even, I want to say what the way I understand it. It means even in Halacha Aleph, where you're making a Tanai pre-Shabbos, pre-Penashmachas, and that allows you to actually identify it on Shabbos, it's also not good. Because when you made the pre-Tanai, it has to be clear where it is. Okay. Now, Rav Shimon doesn't hold of this then. Rav Shimon loyboyim mesuyam. The head of the shlishi, the truma is that ha'omer trumas akri hazeh b'toichay. Means you don't immediately identify it. Trumas akri b'toichay. Where b'toichay? When you remove it, you'll identify it. Rav Shimon omer karashem. The chachamim omer ad sheyomer b'tzfanya b'dromi at least. Elotaimo. Okay. So Rabbi Yossi holds Shehei Mesuyam. A unique din by Trumas U'Maiser is that you have to immediately identify that which you are going to separate. I just want to go back. In the first halacha, right, what do we have? Maybe the location was enough. That could be when he identifies its location. No, he doesn't identify, right? No, that's it. In other words, exactly. According to this, it means that Rabbi Yossi argues with everything, but he still holds to Bereda. Trumas U'Maiser is unique. This din is only Rabbi Yossi. So says the Gemara, Talmud Rav Shimon, like the Mara Fulda pointed out, Rav Shimon doesn't agree with this din of Mesuyam. And let's go again with the Rashirilio. And to say Shema Tibaka Hanoi, is Muslim Lo Shriya. It's much worse than that. Shema Yishkach V'Yishtas Ashad. You might end up drinking it. That's the issue. How great is that? And Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold that Shema Yishkach V'Yishtas Ashad. Like, what are you talking about? A person. Everyone knows you can't have tevel. You're buying it from the kutim. You're worried. You're leaving over around where you said 2 and 10 and 9, whatever the percent is. The person will leave more than that. People are concerned the whole time. In other words, Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rav Shimon. The primary reason. Rav Shimon doesn't hold with Rabbi Yossi's primary reason. They both agree that there's a secondary issue of Shema Tibaka Hanoit, and that's the only thing the Braisa is quoting. And now, where do we find that Rabbi Yossi holds that when you make a unique din by Trumas U'Maisris, that you have to immediately identify the Trumas U'Maisris? And I want to add, this is good. This din of Rabbi Yossi isn't only for the Trumas U'Maisris. Let's go further. What happens by Meiser Sheni when you make first a designation of the Meiser Sheni, and then you are making a statement that you are going to be mechaled on ma'ois, even the money, the coins that you're using to affect the deconsecration, those coins, let Rabbi Yossi, also have to be identified. It cannot be vague. And that's going to be this Braisa. Ad kedei kach, let Rabbi Yossi, the din, legirsas, marafulda, mesuyam. I just want everyone to know that there are so many different ways here. That Rashidilio has such a different approach, like it's, oh my God. But let's go over here. Kahadod de Tani says in a Braisa, Meiser Sheni, Shebechavi is Zeh. And we're not, the issue is not Meiser Sheni is already there. You already identified it. But you're saying Mechulul al Sela Shebekis. It's Mechul on the Sela in my pocket. We're speaking about a person that has more than one Sela, and you didn't identify which coin. So the Tanakama says, Gavaldik, Chilo. Now, which coin? I don't know. You take out later. You determine. You identify the coin later. However, Rabbi Yossi Omer loy chilol. The way we are learning, look inside the Maraful. The loy chilol. It says them in the second to last line. Tanakama is Rab Shimon. The Sfirale doesn't subscribe to this. Then you have to right away identify it. All right. But Rabbi Yossi loy chilol. The last line in Maraful. The income is suyam, because we're speaking about a person. Sheish leharbes loyim bakis. However, umayde Rabbi Yossi daf samachtes on the top. That she'im Omar al Selah HaYishanim. Now, obviously, if the person has 2 old coins in their pocket, Rabbi Yossi, same issue. I have in my pocket halabai, a few sellers, a few dinners, but only one of them is old. Alta seller. Few dinners, one is old. So now that's already identified. So Rabbi Yossi is moida she'im aman al seller hayishana or the aldinan hayoshan shechilo. Question is, what's the chiddush? If I have 2 old saloyim, then why would he be moida? If I only have one seller that's old, what's the chiddush? So the chiddush is that you might have thought gozrinan oto hecha de ikatarto italas. But at least in this case, you only have one older works. And on the other hand, you don't have to identify the seller, but you have to own it. And that will exclude she'im aman, if a person who already has ma'aser shem and he wants to be mechalel, and he says, Al sela she'etoil miyad bini, I'm going to be mechalel on the coin that I'm going to take from my son's possession. Simcha, my son is looking at me and he's saying he's not giving it to me. B'chlal, like, what are you talking about? Even if the son will give it, because okay, Adkan, beautiful.